The afternoon sun blazed over Maplewood, Ohio, painting the quiet suburban street in golden light. It was supposed to be a perfect Saturday. Sarah Hayes flipped burgers on the grill, while her husband Michael arranged paper plates on their backyard picnic table. The smell of charcoal and barbecue sauce filled the warm summer air. Their 3-year-old daughter, Emma, giggled as she pumped her legs on the swing set, her blonde pigtails bouncing with each arc through the air. "Higher, Mommy, higher!" Emma's voice rang out like a bell. Sarah glanced over her shoulder and smiled. "Not too high, sweetheart. Hold on tight." Emma clutched the swing chains, her pink sandals kicking at the sky. In her lap sat Mr. Floppy, the stuffed gray bunny that had been her constant companion since she was 6 months old. Emma never went anywhere without that rabbit. Not to daycare. Not to Grandma's house. Never. Michael called out from the patio. "Honey, can you grab the ketchup from inside?" "Sure, just watch Emma for a second," Sarah replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "I got her," Michael assured, though his attention drifted to his phone as it buzzed with a work email. Sarah disappeared into the house. The screen door slammed behind her. 60 seconds passed. Maybe 90. When she returned with the ketchup bottle, something felt wrong. The air had changed. Too quiet. "Emma?" Sarah's voice carried a note of concern. The swing was still moving, rocking gently in the breeze. But it was empty. Mr. Floppy lay abandoned in the grass beneath it, one fabric ear twisted at an odd angle. Sarah's voice rose sharply. Michael's head snapped up from his phone. "What?" "She's right." His words died as he saw the empty swing. "Mama, baby, where are you?" Sarah screamed, dropping the ketchup bottle. It exploded on the patio, red sauce splattering across the concrete like blood. Michael vaulted over the picnic table and sprinted across the yard. He checked behind the shed, the bushes, inside the playhouse. Nothing. Sarah ran to the front yard, her heart hammering so violently she thought it might burst. This isn't funny. Come out right now." Neighbors began emerging from their homes. Mrs. Patterson from next door rushed over, her face pale. "What's wrong?" "Emma's gone. She was just on the swing." Sarah's voice cracked into sobs. Within minutes, a dozen neighbors flooded the street, calling Emma's name. Someone dialed 911. Police cruisers arrived 7 minutes later, sirens wailing through the quiet neighborhood. Detective Lisa Chun stepped from an unmarked sedan, her expression grave. She'd worked missing persons for 15 years and knew the brutal truth. The first few hours were everything. After that, statistics became nightmares. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes?" "I'm Detective Chun. Tell me exactly what happened." "Every detail matters." Sarah could barely speak through her panic. "She was on the swing. We turned away for just a minute. When I came back, she was gone. Her bunny, she never leaves Mr. Floppy. Never. Something terrible happened. I know it." Detective Chun knelt and examined the stuffed rabbit, still lying in the grass. She pulled out an evidence bag. "I'm taking this. I need recent photos of Emma and what she was wearing. Yellow sundress with white daisies. Pink sandals," Michael stammered, his voice hollow. "She has a birthmark on her left shoulder, shaped like a heart." As Detective Chun coordinated the search, she noticed something chilling. Fresh tire tracks in the soft dirt of flower bed along the side fence. The tread pattern suggested a large vehicle, possibly a van. She immediately called for a crime scene technician. An Amber Alert was issued at 4:47 p.m. Emma Hayes, 3 years old. Blonde hair, blue eyes, last seen wearing a yellow sundress. Every phone in a 50-mile radius buzzed with the notification. By nightfall, The Hayes home had become a command center. The FBI had been notified. Volunteers organized search parties with flashlights. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Sarah sat on the couch, clutching Emma's stuffed animals, rocking back and forth. Michael paced endlessly, his hands trembling. Detective Chun reviewed security footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera. At 3:42 p.m., a white cargo van had slowly cruised past the Hayes residence. The license plate was obscured by mud deliberately, Chun suspected. The driver wore a baseball cap pulled low. At 3:51 p.m., the same van passed again, stopping for 30 seconds near the driveway before driving away. At 3:53 p.m., Emma had vanished. Chun stared at the grainy footage, her jaw clenched. This wasn't a wandering child. This was an abduction. Planned, calculated, somewhere out there, little Emma was with a predator who had been watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As midnight approached and the search continued under portable floodlights, one haunting thought consumed everyone. They were running out of time. 72 hours. That's how long Emma Hayes had been missing. 72 agonizing hours that felt like 72 years. The Hayes family home no longer resembled the cheerful suburban house it had been on Saturday. Now it looked like a war room. Maps covered every wall, marked with colored pins indicating search zones. Coffee cups littered every surface. Sarah hadn't slept since Emma vanished. Her eyes were hollow, rimmed with dark circles. Her voice reduced to a hoarse whisper from screaming her daughter's name. Michael sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands, staring at Emma's empty booster seat. The yellow sundress Emma had been wearing still haunted his dreams. He'd failed his daughter. Turned away for 90 seconds to check his phone. 90 seconds that destroyed their lives. Detective Chun worked around the clock, following every lead, no matter how thin. The white van had been spotted on 3 other security cameras heading east toward the industrial district. But then it disappeared, as if it had simply vanished into thin air. Traffic cameras showed nothing. The license plate remained obscured. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit had created a profile of the suspect, male, likely between 35 and 50, organized, patient, possibly with prior offenses. That profile matched 47 registered offenders in the Tri-County area. The media circus had grown. National news networks broadcasted live updates every hour. Sarah had made a tearful plea on television, her voice breaking as she begged whoever took Emma to bring her baby home. The footage went viral. Millions shared Emma's photo. Tips flooded the hotline, hundreds of them, but most led nowhere. Then, on the morning of day 4, everything changed. A specialized K-9 unit arrived from the state capitol. Officer Jake Morrison stepped out of a white SUV, followed by his partner, a magnificent German shepherd named Duke. The dog was a legend in law enforcement circles. 4 years old, with a track record that seemed almost supernatural. 17 missing persons found. All 17 brought home alive. Duke wasn't just any search and rescue dog. He was the best. Officer Morrison was a quiet man in his early 40s, with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes that had seen too much tragedy. But when he looked at Duke, those eyes softened. The bond between them was something rare, something that went beyond training or commands. They understood each other perfectly. Detective Chun briefed Morrison on the case, showing him the evidence bags containing Mr. Floppy and the clothing items from Emma's room. Morrison held the stuffed rabbit close to Duke's nose. The German shepherd sniffed carefully, his tail still, his brown eyes intensely focused. "He's got it," Morrison said quietly. "Let him work." Duke began moving through the backyard, his nose low to the ground. He circled the swing set 3 times, then moved toward the side fence where the tire tracks had been found. His body language changed, ears forward, tail rigid. He'd found something. The K-9 unit followed Duke as he led them through the neighborhood, past familiar houses and manicured lawns. Volunteers and officers fell silent, watching the German shepherd work with breathless anticipation. Duke moved with purpose, crossing streets, cutting through yards, following an invisible trail that only he could detect. 3 miles from the Hayes home, Duke stopped at an abandoned warehouse. The building loomed like a forgotten giant, broken windows, rusted metal siding, weeds growing through cracks in the pavement. It had been empty for years since the factory closed down. Duke's behavior changed dramatically. He began whining, scratching at a side entrance, his entire body trembling with urgency. "He's alerting," Morrison said, his heart racing. "Someone's inside." Or was recently. Detective Chun radioed for backup. Within minutes, tactical units surrounded the building. Officers moved in, flashlights cutting through the darkness inside. The warehouse was massive, full of abandoned machinery, empty crates, shadows that played tricks on the eyes. Duke pulled Morrison deeper into the building, past the main floor, down a set of concrete stairs that led to a basement level. The air grew colder, damp. The smell of mildew mixed with something else. Something wrong. Duke stopped at a wall. But it wasn't just a wall. The concrete blocks were slightly different colors, newer than the surrounding structure. A false wall. "Here," Morrison shouted. "We need tools here now." Officers attacked the wall with sledgehammers. Concrete dust filled the air. Each blow echoed through the basement like thunder. After the third strike, the wall crumbled. Behind it was a small room, barely 6 feet by 6 feet. No windows, no light. And huddled in the corner, covered in a dirty blanket, was a tiny figure with blonde hair. Emma. Duke had found her. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The tiny figure in the corner remained motionless, buried under the filthy blanket like a broken doll. "Emma?" Officer Morrison's voice was barely a whisper. Detective Chun pushed forward, her flashlight illuminating the cramped space. The walls were bare concrete. A plastic water bottle lay on its side, nearly empty. A paper plate with crumbs sat in the corner. And there, curled into the smallest ball imaginable, was 3-year-old Emma Hayes. "Get the paramedics down here now," Chun shouted into her radio, her professional composure cracking for the first time in her career. Morrison knelt slowly, not wanting to frighten the child. "Emma, sweetie, it's okay. You're safe now. We're police officers. We're here to take you home to Mommy and Daddy." Emma didn't respond. Didn't move. Her eyes were open but vacant, staring at nothing and everything. She was alive, but something essential had been stolen from her. Duke whined softly and approached carefully, his movements gentle despite his size. The German shepherd lowered himself to the ground and crawled forward on his belly. Submissive posture meant to show he wasn't a threat. When he reached Emma, he nudged her hand with his wet nose. Something flickered in Emma's eyes. Her tiny fingers, dirty and trembling, reached out and grabbed Duke's fur. She buried her face in his neck, but made no sound. No crying, no words. Just silence. "That's it, baby," Morrison encouraged, his own eyes burning with tears. "Hold on to Duke. He's got you." Paramedics rushed down the stairs with a gurney and medical equipment. They assessed Emma, quickly dehydrated, malnourished, bruises on her arms and legs, but miraculously no life-threatening injuries. Physically, she would recover. But the emotional damage? That was written all over her blank expression. As they lifted Emma onto the gurney, she refused to let go of Duke's fur. She clung to him with surprising strength, her knuckles white. "Let the dog go with her," Detective Chun ordered. "Whatever she needs." Duke jumped into the ambulance without hesitation, settling beside the gurney as if he'd done it 1,000 times. Emma's hand found his fur again immediately. It was the only thing tethering her to reality. The ambulance screamed through the streets toward Children's Hospital, sirens wailing. Behind them, the warehouse exploded with law enforcement activity. Crime scene investigators swarmed the building, photographing every inch of that horrific room. Evidence bags filled with items that would paint a picture of 4 days of hell. Detective Chun stood in the basement, her jaw clenched so tight it ached. She'd seen terrible things in her career, but this small room with its concrete walls and complete darkness would haunt her forever. A child had been trapped here, alone, terrified, while the world searched desperately above ground. Emma had been buried alive just 3 miles from home. "We've got an ID on the vehicle," an officer called out. "White van registered to Robert Dalton, 1247 Oakwood Avenue, apartment 3B. Move." Chun barked. "I want him in custody before he knows we found her." 20 minutes later, tactical units surrounded a shabby apartment building. Robert Dalton was arrested as he stepped out to his van, a cigarette dangling from his lips. He was 42 years old, with thinning brown hair, cold gray eyes, and a smirk that made Chun's blood boil. "I want my lawyer," were his first words. "You'll need one," Chen replied, her voice ice. "We found her. She's alive. And you're going to prison for the rest of your miserable life." The smirk faltered for just a second before returning. Dalton said nothing else. Inside his apartment, investigators found a house of horrors. Photographs of Emma pinned to a wall taken from a distance over several weeks. He'd been stalking the Hayes family, learning their routines, waiting for the perfect moment. They found Emma's hair ties in a drawer, her pink sandals in his closet, a notebook filled with disturbing writings that made seasoned detectives physically ill. The evidence was overwhelming, damning, undeniable. At the hospital, Sarah and Michael Hayes burst through the emergency room doors, having broken every speed limit to get there. They found Emma in a private room, hooked to 4 fluids, with Duke lying on the floor beside her bed. Emma's hand dangled over the side, her fingers tangled in his fur. "Baby," Sarah sobbed, rushing to the bed. She gathered Emma into her arms, rocking her, kissing her hair, whispering every prayer and promise she knew. But Emma didn't respond. She stared ahead with those empty eyes, trapped somewhere far away that love couldn't reach yet. Michael wrapped his arms around both of them, his entire body shaking with sobs of relief and grief. They had their daughter back. She was alive, but the Emma who'd giggled on the swing just 4 days ago was gone. 6 months had crawled by since Emma's rescue. 6 months that felt like a lifetime. The Hayes home should have returned to normal. Emma was home, safe in her own bed, surrounded by her toys and family. But normal was a distant memory, something that belonged to a different family in a different life. Emma spoke maybe 10 words a day, sometimes fewer. She'd whisper yes or no to direct questions. Occasionally she'd say "Mommy" or "Daddy" in a voice so small it barely existed. But full sentences? Conversations? Laughter? Those had vanished with that yellow SUNDRESS. Sarah had quit her job to stay home full-time. She watched Emma like a hawk, terrified that if she looked away for even a second, her daughter might disappear again. The guilt consumed her. Those 90 seconds in the kitchen haunted her dreams, turned them into nightmares, where she ran and ran, but could never reach the swing in time. Michael had aged 10 years in 6 months. His hair had started graying at the temples. He'd lost 20 pounds. Co-workers whispered when he walked by, their pity like acid on his skin. Everyone meant well, but their sympathy was suffocating. Dr. Rachel Martinez, a child psychologist specializing in trauma, came to their home 3 times a week. She was a warm woman in her 50s with kind eyes and endless patience. She'd worked with abused and traumatized children for over 20 years. But Emma's case was among the most severe she'd encountered. She's experiencing selective mutism as a result of extreme trauma, Dr. Martinez explained during a session with Sarah and Michael. Her mind has essentially shut down her ability to communicate as a protective mechanism. She's locked the memories away, and her voice went with them. Will she ever speak again? Sarah asked, her voice breaking. Really speak? Children are remarkably resilient, Dr. Martinez said carefully. But there's no timeline for this kind of healing. It could be months. It could be years. Forcing her to talk about what happened could cause more harm than good. Michael's hands clenched into fists. That monster is sitting in jail, probably eating 3 meals a day, sleeping comfortably, while our daughter can't even talk. It's not fair. No, Dr. Martinez agreed quietly. It's not. Meanwhile, at the county courthouse, Assistant District Attorney Karen Phillips was fighting a battle that seemed increasingly unwinnable. She sat in her office surrounded by evidence boxes, case files, and cold coffee. The evidence against Robert Dalton was strong: the photographs, the notebook, Emma's belongings in his apartment, the tire tracks matching his van. But it was all circumstantial, without Emma's testimony, without her voice identifying him and describing what happened in that room. A skilled defense attorney could plant reasonable doubt in a jury's mind. And Robert Dalton had hired the best. Richard Blackwell was a snake in a $1,000 suit. 58 years old, with silver hair, a practiced smile, and a reputation for getting guilty clients acquitted. He'd defended murderers, rapists, and child predators. He'd won cases that should have been impossible to win. He specialized in attacking witnesses, finding weaknesses, exploiting technicalities. During a pretrial hearing, Blackwell laid out his defense strategy with chilling confidence. Your Honor, my client maintains his innocence. Mr. Dalton admits he found a child wandering near that warehouse. He panicked, made a terrible mistake by not immediately calling authorities, but he never harmed her. He was actually trying to protect her until he could figure out the right thing to do. Phillips nearly choked. That's absurd. He stalked the Hayes family for weeks. We have photographs he took. Photography isn't illegal, Blackwell interrupted smoothly. Perhaps Mr. Dalton was concerned about suspicious activity in the neighborhood. The belongings found in his apartment? The child must have dropped them when he found her. As for the room in the warehouse, my client worked security for the property management company. He had legitimate access to that building. It was a lie. All of it. But it was a lie told with such polished conviction that Phillips could see how it might work. Dalton's smirk in every court appearance confirmed he thought so too. The prosecution's entire case rests on the testimony of a 3-year-old child, Blackwell continued. A child who, untold, doesn't speak, can't testify. Without her statement, without her identification, without her voice, there's no case. Just speculation and circumstance. Phillips felt sick. He was right. Emma was the key to everything. But Emma was locked in silence, trapped behind walls of trauma that might never come down. The trial was scheduled for January, just 6 weeks away. 6 weeks to somehow help a broken child find her voice, or watch a monster walk free. That night, Phillips called Detective Chun. We need a miracle, she said quietly. Because without Emma's testimony, Dalton's going to beat this. Chun stared at the case files spread across her desk. Somewhere in this evidence, there had to be something they'd missed. Something that could put Dalton away forever. But deep down, she knew the truth. The only witness who could seal Dalton's fate was a 3-year-old girl who couldn't speak. 6 months had crawled by since Emma's rescue, yet the shadow of that night clung to every corner of the Hayes home. Sarah still woke in the middle of the night to check if Emma was breathing. Michael still paused at every swing in the park, every child in a yellow dress. Life had resumed, but not really. It moved like a clock missing its hands, ticking but never telling time. Dr. Martinez kept visiting 3 times a week. She brought puzzles, crayons, picture cards tools meant to coax words from frightened children. But Emma responded to none of them. She would draw, but never people. Just animals, dogs, mostly sketched in soft, looping circles. Always with gentle eyes. One afternoon, Dr. Martinez tried something different. She placed a photo of a police K-9 unit on the table. "Do you remember this dog, Emma?" she asked gently. Emma's small hand hovered over the image. Her eyes softened. Then she nodded. Just once. Sarah's breath caught. It was the first time Emma had reacted to anything related to that night, the night she'd been found because of Officer Daniels and his dog. Rex, the same dog who'd tracked her scent for miles through the dark woods. The same one who'd found her hiding beneath a collapsed fence, trembling but alive. Dr. Martinez noticed. "Maybe," she told Sarah after the session, "we can use that connection." A week later, Officer Daniels came by the house. Rex trotted in beside him, tail wagging gently. Emma froze at first, but then her eyes widened in recognition. She whispered something so faint, Sarah thought she'd imagined it. "Doggy." It was one word. One soft, miraculous word. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth. Daniels knelt beside Rex, smiling through tears. "Hey, sweetheart," he said quietly. "You remember us, huh?" Emma took a cautious step forward. Rex lowered himself to the floor, his eyes warm and patient. Emma reached out, touching his fur. For a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of her small breath and Rex's gentle panting. Dr. Martinez, watching from the corner, smiled for the first time in months. "That," she whispered, "is progress." Over the next few weeks, Rex became part of Emma's therapy. He'd visit twice a week, lying beside her while she played or drew. She began humming when he was around. Sometimes she'd murmur words, fragments of memory perhaps, but they faded before anyone could catch them. Daniels was patient. He didn't push. He just let Rex do his quiet work. "Kids like her don't need pressure," he told Sarah once. "They just need someone who listens even if they can't speak." By early December, Emma was a little brighter. She laughed once when Rex sneezed, a sound so sudden it startled everyone in the room. For Sarah and Michael, that tiny laugh was like sunlight through clouds. But as the trial drew near, the dread returned. Phillips, the prosecutor, kept calling with updates that weren't really updates. "We're running out of time," she said during one late-night meeting at the Hayes home. If Emma doesn't speak in court, Dalton could walk. Sarah looked at her daughter sleeping on the couch, Rex curled beside her. "She's just a baby," Sarah whispered. "You can't expect her to." "I know," Phillips interrupted softly. "But the defense is ruthless. They'll paint Dalton as a good Samaritan. Without Emma's voice, we have nothing strong enough to destroy that lie." The silence in the room felt heavier than the air. A week later, during therapy, Dr. Martinez gently asked Emma, "Can you tell me who helped you that night?" Emma looked at Rex, then at Daniels, then whispered something no one expected. "Doggy find me." Sarah's tears spilled over instantly. Martinez kept her voice calm. "Yes, he found you, sweetheart. You were so brave." Emma's lips trembled. She whispered again, barely audible, "Bad man hurt me." Daniels felt his heart stop. For the first time, Emma had acknowledged what happened. 2 words, simple, fragile, but powerful, enough to pierce through silence and fear. Sarah held her daughter close, sobbing quietly. Dr. Martinez met Daniel's eyes and nodded. "She's remembering," she said softly. "She's starting to let it out." When Phillips heard the news, she didn't celebrate. "Not yet. We can't push her too fast," she warned. "But this might be our only chance." They began preparing the courtroom. Daniels requested to bring Rex to the witness stand. Blackwell, the defense attorney, sneered at the idea. A dog in a courtroom? What's next? Therapy cats giving testimony? But the judge, an older man, with a quiet sense of justice, approved the request. "If that animal helps the child speak the truth, he's as welcome here as anyone else," he said. The trial date was set for January 12th. The night before the trial, Sarah barely slept. She sat beside Emma's bed, watching her daughter hold onto Rex's small plush toy. "You don't have to say anything, baby," she whispered. "Just be brave. Mommy and Daddy are right here." Emma didn't answer, but she reached out in her sleep, her fingers curling around Sarah's hand. Downstairs, Daniels paced beside Rex's crate. The dog looked up, sensing his handler's unease. "Tomorrow's the big day, buddy," Daniels murmured. "You ready to do your magic again?" Rex's tail thumped once against the floor. Daniels smiled faintly. "Yeah, me too." Morning came cold and gray. Snow dusted the courthouse steps. Reporters swarmed the entrance, whispering about the silent child who might finally speak. Inside, Emma clutched her stuffed bunny, her tiny fingers trembling. As she entered the courtroom, Rex walked beside her, steady and calm. The judge smiled gently. "Hello again, Miss Hayes." Emma looked up at him, but said nothing. Daniels guided her to the stand, Rex lying quietly at her feet. The courtroom was still. The defendant stared, expressionless. Sarah and Michael sat behind their daughter, their hearts pounding. Phillips stepped forward. "Emma," she said softly, "do you remember who helped you that night?" Emma's gaze fell to Rex. She leaned down, her lips brushing his ear. Then, in a whisper only he could hear, she said the same two words that would change everything. "Bad man." The courtroom exploded in chaos. "Absolutely not." Defense attorney Richard Blackwell shot to his feet, his face flushed red with fury. "Your Honor, this is a blatant attempt to manipulate the jury." A police dog sitting next to the witness stand? They might as well put a neon sign over my client that says, "Guilty." Assistant District Attorney Karen Phillips stood her ground, her voice steady, despite the tension crackling through the air. "Your Honor, we're not talking about courtroom theatrics. We're talking about giving a traumatized 3-year-old child the support she needs to testify. Without Duke's presence, Emma Hayes cannot speak. The defense knows this. They're counting on it." Judge Harold Patterson sat behind his bench, his weathered face unreadable. 30 years on the bench, and he'd never faced a decision quite like this. The motion before him was unprecedented in their jurisdiction, allowing a canine officer to accompany a child witness during testimony. The gallery was packed. Media from across the country had descended on this small Ohio courthouse. This case had captured national attention, the little girl who'd been found alive, the heroic police dog. And now this controversial legal battle that could set precedent for courts everywhere. Blackwell paced like a caged tiger. "Your Honor, I sympathize with the child's condition. Truly I do. But my client has a constitutional right to a fair trial. The presence of a police dog, a symbol of law enforcement and authority, creates an inherent bias. The jury will see that dog and assume my client is guilty before a single word of testimony is heard. The dog would be positioned at the witness's feet, partially hidden from the jury's direct view," Phillips countered. "And let's be honest about what's really happening here. Mr. Blackwell doesn't want Emma to testify at all. He knows her testimony will destroy his client's fabricated story. This objection has nothing to do with fairness, and everything to do with silencing a victim. How dare you? Blackwell started. Enough. Judge Patterson's gavel cracked like thunder. Both of you, sit down. I will not have my courtroom turned into a circus. The judge leaned back in his chair, studying the thick stack of legal briefs and expert testimony before him. Over the past 2 weeks, he'd heard from child psychologists, legal scholars, victims advocates, and canine handlers. The arguments on both sides were compelling. Dr. Rachel Martinez had testified passionately about Emma's breakthrough with Duke. This child has made it explicitly clear that she can only testify if Duke is present. She told her mother, and I quote, "I can tell the truth if Duke is there, because he keeps the bad away. Without him, she retreats into silence. Duke isn't a prop or a sympathy tool, he's a therapeutic necessity." An expert in canine psychology explained how facility dogs, specially trained animals used in hospitals, schools, and increasingly in courtrooms, provided measurable calming effects for trauma victims. Duke's presence lowers Emma's cortisol levels, reduces her anxiety, and allows her to access traumatic memories without being re-traumatized. This isn't about emotion. It's about neuroscience. But the defense had brought their own experts. A jury consultant testified that the presence of any law enforcement symbol, including a police dog, would prejudice jurors. People subconsciously associate police dogs with criminal apprehension, drug detection, and guilty suspects. The jury won't be able to separate the dog from that context. A constitutional law professor argued that allowing the dog could violate the defendant's Sixth Amendment rights. The confrontation clause guarantees the accused the right to face their accuser without undue sympathy or bias being introduced. A child witness with a dog creates an emotional dynamic that could improperly influence the verdict. Judge Patterson had spent sleepless nights reviewing cases from other states where courthouse facility dogs had been used. Washington State had allowed it. California had allowed it. Several other jurisdictions had successfully integrated facility dogs for child witnesses and vulnerable victims. The precedent existed, but every case was different. He thought about his own granddaughter, just a year older than Emma. He thought about justice, real justice, not the technical kind that let guilty men walk free on technicalities. But he also thought about the Constitution, the rights of the accused, and the integrity of the judicial system he'd spent his life serving. The courtroom remained silent, waiting. Sarah Hayes gripped her husband's hand so tightly her knuckles were white. Michael stared at the judge, silently praying. Detective Chun sat in the back row, her jaw clenched. Officer Morrison sat beside her, one hand resting on Duke's head. The German shepherd sat calmly, as if he understood the weight of this moment. Robert Dalton smirked from the defense table, confident that tradition and legal precedent would work in his favor. Finally, Judge Patterson spoke. "I've made my decision." The entire courtroom leaned forward. "This court recognizes the unprecedented nature of this request," Patterson began, his voice grave. "But we must also recognize that justice cannot be served if a victim is unable to provide testimony due to trauma inflicted by the defendant's own actions. To allow that would be to give criminals veto power over their own prosecution." Blackwell's face went pale. "Therefore, I am granting the prosecution's motion. Duke will be permitted to accompany Emma Hayes during her testimony, positioned at her feet and partially obscured from the jury's view. I will instruct the jury that the dog's presence is solely for the witness's comfort and must not factor into their deliberations regarding guilt or innocence." The gavel fell. Phillips exhaled in relief. Sarah burst into tears. Michael pulled her close. Blackwell's confident smirk had vanished, replaced by barely controlled rage. The trial would proceed. Emma would testify, and Duke would be by her side. The morning air was crisp and cold as the Hayes family arrived at the courthouse. January snow crunched beneath their feet. Media cameras flashed like lightning, reporters shouting questions that went unanswered. Sarah held Emma's small hand tightly, while Michael shielded them from the chaos with his body. Emma wore a simple blue dress that Sarah had carefully chosen, nothing too fancy. Nothing that would make her look like she was being dressed up for sympathy. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She clutched Mr. Floppy against her chest, the stuffed rabbit that had been with her through everything. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Every seat was filled. The jury, 7 women and 5 men, sat in their box, their faces serious and attentive. They'd heard 2 weeks of testimony already. Expert witnesses, police officers, FBI agents, character witnesses. But everyone knew this moment was what the entire trial had been building toward, the testimony of Hope. Emma Hayes. At the prosecution table, Ada Karen Phillips reviewed her notes one final time, though she'd memorized every question. This had to be perfect. One mistake, one moment that traumatized Emma, and they could lose everything. At the defense table, Richard Blackwell sat with calculated confidence, his expensive pen tapping a steady rhythm against his legal pad. Beside him, Robert Dalton stared straight ahead, his face an emotionless mask, but his eyes, cold and gray, occasionally flickered toward the door where Emma would enter. Judge Patterson took his seat. The court calls Emma Hayes to the witness stand. The courtroom doors opened. Officer Jake Morrison entered first, Duke walking calmly at his side. The German shepherd's presence immediately drew every eye in the room. Then came Emma, holding her mother's hand, each step seeming to take tremendous courage. Sarah walked Emma to the witness box, knelt down, and whispered something in her daughter's ear. Emma nodded slightly. Sarah kissed her forehead and reluctantly stepped back, taking a seat in the front row where Emma could see her. Morrison guided Duke to the witness stand area, positioning him at Emma's feet, partially hidden from the jury's direct view as Judge Patterson had ordered. Emma immediately reached down, her small fingers finding Duke's soft fur. The tension in her shoulders eased, just slightly. The court clerk approached with a children's book instead of a Bible. "Do you promise to tell the truth?" Emma's voice was barely audible. "Yes." Judge Patterson leaned forward, his voice gentle. "Emma, you don't need to be scared. Just answer the questions as best you can, okay? And if you need a break at any time, you just tell us." Emma nodded, her hand never leaving Duke's fur. Ada Phillips stood and approached slowly, keeping her distance so as not to overwhelm the child. "Hi, Emma. My name is Karen. I'm going to ask you some questions. Is that okay?" "Okay," Emma whispered. "Can you tell the jury your name and how old you are?" "Emma Hayes. I'm 3. Almost 4. "Emma, do you remember last summer when you were playing on your swing?" Emma's hand tightened in Duke's fur. "Yes. Can you tell us what happened that day?" For a long moment, Emma said nothing. The courtroom was so silent, you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Then, in a voice that broke every heart in the room, Emma began to speak. "I was swinging. Mommy was cooking. A man came. He said my mommy sent him to get me. But she didn't." Tears started rolling down Emma's cheeks. "He picked me up. I dropped Mr. Floppy. I tried to yell, but he put his hand on my mouth. It smelled bad." Sarah sobbed quietly in the front row. Michael's jaw clenched so hard, looked like it might shatter. Phillips continued gently. "What happened next, Emma?" "He put me in a van. It was dark. I was scared. He took me to a scary building. There was a little room with no windows. It was so dark. I couldn't see anything. I was alone for so long." "Emma, is the man who took you in this courtroom today?" Emma's eyes slowly moved across the room. When they landed on Robert Dalton, Her entire body began to shake. Duke whined softly and pressed against her leg. Emma's finger lifted, pointing directly at the defense table. Him, the bad man? The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Patterson gavelled for silence. Phillips asked several more questions, each one revealing more details. Emma described the room, the darkness, being hungry and thirsty, crying for her parents, and the terrifying moment when she thought no one would ever find her. And it was Blackwell's turn. He stood slowly, his expression carefully neutral. Emma, I just have a few questions for you. His tone was soft, but there was something beneath it, something calculating. He asked about the timeline, about what she remembered from before being taken. His questions were clever, designed to seem innocent, but actually sowing seeds of doubt. Emma, you said you were in the dark for a long time. But how can you be sure how long it was? Time feels different when we're scared, doesn't it? I don't know. And you said you were alone. But if it was dark, how could you be sure someone wasn't there? I was alone. Emma's voice cracked. Emma, isn't it possible you're confused? That maybe you don't remember everything exactly, right? You're very scared, after all. Emma's breathing became rapid. Her hand clutched Duke's fur desperately. I remember. But Blackwell pressed on, his questions becoming more pointed, more aggressive. Are you really sure it was my client? Maybe you saw his picture on TV so many times that you think it was him. Emma cried out, her voice rising in panic. It was him. He's the bad man. But the damage was done. Emma was spiraling, her answers becoming shorter, more uncertain. I don't know. I don't remember. I'm scared. Phillips could see it happening. Emma was shutting down, retreating back into silence. Blackwell saw it too, and he was ready to exploit it to create reasonable doubt. The courtroom held its collective breath as Emma Hayes trembled on the witness stand. Her small body shook with fear, tears streaming down her face. Defense attorney Richard Blackwell stood before her, preparing to deliver what he believed would be the final blow to the prosecution's case. Emma, Blackwell said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, you've been through something terrible. But isn't it possible that you're confused? That maybe your memory isn't quite right? After all, you are very scared. Emma's voice cracked into silence. Her eyes went distant, vacant. She was disappearing again, retreating into that protective shell where words couldn't reach her. Ada Phillips started to rise, ready to object, to call for a recess, anything to protect Emma from this psychological assault. Sarah Hayes gripped the railing, her face twisted in anguish, watching her daughter fall apart. Then something extraordinary happened. Emma leaned down from the witness stand and pressed her face close to Duke's ear. The German shepherd remained perfectly still, his brown eyes focused and alert. Emma's lips moved, whispering something so quietly that no one else in the courtroom could hear. It was a secret meant only for Duke, shared in that private language between a traumatized child and the dog who'd saved her life. Duke responded with a soft, gentle whine. He shifted his position and lifted his head, pressing his nose against Emma's hand. Then he did something remarkable. He looked directly at Robert Dalton, his ears going forward in an alert posture, and gave a low, almost imperceptible growl. Emma sat back up. Something had changed in her eyes. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Determination. Courage borrowed from the four-legged hero at her feet. She turned to face the courtroom, her small voice suddenly clear and strong. He smells. Judge Patterson leaned forward. What did you say, Emma? He smells, Emma repeated, her voice growing stronger. The bad man has a smell. A bad smell. Blackwell's confident expression flickered with confusion. Your Honor, This is highly irregular. Let her speak. Judge Patterson ordered firmly. Emma's words came faster now, tumbling out as if a dam had broken. When the bad man took me, he had a smell. Like old cigarettes that Grandpa used to smoke. And like the black oil stuff that gets on Daddy's hands when he fixes the car. That smell was everywhere in the van. It was on his clothes. It was in the dark room. I remember because it made my tummy hurt. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Phillips felt her heart racing. This was new information. Emma had never mentioned anything about a smell before. Emma continued, her hand still resting on Duke's fur. When Duke found me, he smelled the same way. Not because Duke was bad, but because he was sniffing the bad man's smell to find me. Duke found me because he followed that smell. Officer Morrison's eyes widened with understanding. Of course, Duke had tracked Emma's scent. But he'd also been following the scent of her captor cigarette, smoke and motor oil that would have been transferred onto Emma's clothes and skin. Blackwell tried to regain control. Your Honor, this is speculation from a child who, Mr. Blackwell. Judge Patterson interrupted icily. Sit down. Phillips jumped to her feet. Your Honor, I request an immediate recess to investigate this testimony. Granted. We'll reconvene in 2 hours. The courtroom exploded with activity. Investigators rushed from the building. Detective Chun immediately contacted the crime scene unit. Within 90 minutes, they had their confirmation. Robert Dalton's work van, still in the evidence impound, reeked of cigarette smoke and motor oil. His apartment, every surface, every piece of clothing, every item, carried the same distinctive combination. Dalton was a chain smoker who worked part-time as a mechanic. The smell was his signature, as unique as a fingerprint, more damning. When investigators re-examined Emma's clothing from the day she was found, forensic analysis confirmed traces of tobacco residue and automotive lubricant, the exact type Dalton used in his work. The evidence had been there all along, but Emma's testimony had finally connected the dots in a way that was irrefutable. When court reconvened, Blackwell's confident demeanor had crumbled. Phillips presented the forensic findings. The jury's faces told the story. They believed, Emma. Those 2 whispered words to Duke had unlocked the key piece of evidence that sealed Dalton's fate. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood with a piece of paper that would change lives forever. On all counts, we find the defendant, Robert Dalton, guilty. The courtroom erupted. Sarah collapsed in Michael's arms, sobbing with relief. Dalton's emotionless mask finally cracked, his face contorting with rage as officers handcuffed him. Judge Patterson's sentencing was swift and severe. Mr. Dalton, you are sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. You will never harm another child again. As Dalton was led away, Emma ran to Duke and wrapped her arms around his neck. Thank you for keeping the bat away, she whispered. The case became landmark legislation. Within 2 years, facility dog programs were established in courtrooms across America, with Emma's testimony cited as the turning point. Officer Morrison received the Medal of Valor, though he insisted Duke deserved all the credit. 2 years after the trial, when Duke retired from active duty, the Hayes family adopted him without hesitation. He spent his golden years in their backyard, often lying beneath that same swing set where Emma had been taken. But now, Emma swung high and free, her laughter ringing through the air proof that healing was possible. That justice could prevail, and that sometimes. The greatest heroes have 4 legs and fur. Emma grew into a bright, resilient young woman. The nightmares faded. The fear loosened its grip. She eventually became a child advocate, working to give voice to victims who'd lost their own. In every speech she gave, every life she touched, she told the same story about a German shepherd named Duke, who taught her that courage sometimes comes on 4 legs. And that even in our darkest moments, hope can find us. And it all started with 2 words, whispered to a dog who understood. He smells. Those 2 words had changed everything.